The 1960s was a time of bright and new styles of fashion. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, the style was very conservative and more restraining, as well as less colorful. And as the 1960s went on, the color was more prevalent and the skin was shown more. The 50s provided more class and style in the design of the fashion clothing. In the 60s, London became the center of the fashion world instead of Paris, where it had been originally. As the Beatles, a band from the 60s, became popular, their style of color seeped into the fashion world. Women's fashion showed extreme style and attitude. At the beginning of the decade, the style was formal, with white pearls and tailored suit dresses. But by the end of the decade, it was led by supermodel Twiggy, which was a free mind for women and where clothing did not require effort or thought. A big theme of the 60s was that there were no such thing as too short dresses or skirts, whereas it can be compared to the 1920s in the flapper revolution. The new look of the 1960s was created by French designer Christian Dior, who decided it would be complex and unnatural. The waists were squeezed with elegant A-lines, and the fabrics were heavy, and the formal attire was fancy but simplified. The ideal look for the 1920s woman was elegant, with a semi-fitted Chanel suit jacket. A blouse with slim A-line skirt fell to the middle of the knee or past. The collars would be simple, rounded, or non-existent. The sleeves above, below, or with no sleeves, with dresses that had solid colors with no embellishments. They had empire waistcoats, top coats. They usually had pumps, but low heels, long white gloves, a strand of pearls, and the trademark pillbox hat. Eventually, by the mid-60s, the mod look was performed, which was young women in a high miniskirt with brighter colors and patterns. They tried to maintain this conservative form in schools, but as the mod became more normal, it became more prevalent in society. The mini almost became an art form because it was worn all over. Stockings or tights were used to cover up and be more conservative, and pantyhose became more prevalent. The mini skirts usually fell above the knee, or the micro mini, which barely hid the undergarments. For men's fashion, at the beginning of the 1960s, it was known to be formal. Care more, dare more. The men were more style conscious, neat, and had well styled haircuts with slim sides. Often men would wear suits that were trendy, but for office and social occasions, as well as to work. The suits had Italian influence with slimmer lines and a fitted look. The suits were daring and had bright colors. They also were collarless and had collarless jackets, and tight fitted pants and double breasted jackets. By the end of the 1960s, it was not uncommon to see a man wearing a scarf of silk tied around like a tie. The fashion was less formal. Men wore easy clothes to move around in, and it was common to wear comfy clothes around and out and about. Another trend was flared pants at the bottom of their look, which created a casual look. For children, the 1960s fashion look was similar to the adults in that it was simple. For young boys, school clothes were made of dress shirts of cotton blend, a bright solid color, or interesting patterns. A plaid shirt was also popular with socks that often matched the shirt. For young girls, the skirt, blouse, and sweater combo was extremely common, with wool A-line skirts that fell mid-knee and muted heather colors. Flesh-colored stockings were worn under the skirts and dresses, with cotton blouses and the subdued color print. Cardigans were often tied around the necks, and the shirt waists were one-piece dresses worn with a cardigan, which was extremely common for young girls. A notable figure of the 1960s was Jackie Kennedy, who created her own look with clean, simple, and well-fitted style. She wore perfectly matched accessories with dresses without collars, low-heeled shoes, and the classic pillbox hat. Many women in the US copied her fashion, but she was also criticized for having two French designers and not enough American looks. President Kennedy was another notable figure for the 1960s fashion, as he embodied the classic preppy look in his casual wear, but also wore the tight fitted suits that were now coming in age of the late 60s. Lastly, Brigitte Bardot became a notable figure at the end of the 1960s, where she was the opposite of Jackie Kennedy. She wore gingham and lace in a lot of her looks, which became a new trend at the late of the 1960s, and her look was often known as cheap but bold. The 1960s fashion carried on into many more decades of fashion through the bright and vibrant colors and patterns often found in the next decade, the 70s, in the flower power type of fashion. The mini skirts were also a huge trend in later decades, also coming up to the current 2000s and beyond.